Alright, what's going on everyone? While Standard may have recently rotated with the release of Dominaria United, I'm pleased to tell you that many of the Standard Challenger decks from last year are still quite playable in the new Standard. Today we'll be looking at the Dimir Control deck, and I'll show you what you can do to bring this deck back up to Standard legality. So here's the original deck list, not upgraded in any way. This is what you got out of the box, and if we highlight in red the cards we lose to rotation, it looks quite alarming at first, but it's not as bad as it might seem. Remember, this is a control deck, so it has a lot of bulk, common and uncommon removal and counter spells, so all of this is easy to replace. It's easy to replace a rotated common counter spell with a new common counter spell. And the mana base looks bad, but remember, it has snow lands, right? All these basic snow-covered lands, you just replace them with non-snow lands, not a big deal. So it looks like a lot, but a lot of this is just really easy, common, uncommon, easy stuff. Easy stuff here. It's not a big deal. The most impactful things that we lose are things like Emrith, Crippling Fear, and Blood on the Snow. These are the things we should be concerned about. While we can certainly replace these, the ideal cards we could play cost a lot of money. Like, for example, we could replace these three cards with Sheoldred, Liliana, and Meathook Massacre. That would probably be the preference, except for the part where, holy crap, these cards are expensive. These cards are very expensive. That's a lot of money. So my main goal here with this video is just to get this deck back up to speed. It's to get this back to standard legality as cheaply as possible, so you can start playing at Friday Night Magic with this deck again. That's what we're going to be doing here. Hopefully that's useful. So we'll start with Crippling Fear. We have a nice budget alternative in the form of Drag to the Bottom. So this gives all creatures -3/-3. Well, technically it has domain, but in our deck it's got to give -3/-3 because we have two land types, and it gives -X/-X, where X is the land types you control +1, so 3. So it's very similar. 4 mana, all things get -3/-3. The only downside is we can't name Werewolf. In the past, we could name Werewolf with Crippling Fear and save our Graveyard Trespassers. Unfortunately, those are going to get swept up by Drag to the Bottom. So imperfect, but it works, and it's cheap, so that's good. Next, we need to talk about Emrith. I thought this was going to be irreplaceable, but we actually have a pretty close card in Standard right now. We have Sphinx of Clear Skies, and this fills a very similar role. They're both 5 mana, 5/5 flyers. They have ward, and they generate card advantage. That's what made Emrith so good, is it was a flying, kind of a scary threat, a 5-power flying threat that also drew cards in a control deck. It's great. And Sphinx, it has a lot of text, but basically what it's going to do is when you hit a player, you get to look at the top 2 cards and put one of them into your hand. I know, that's not what it says. Technically what happens is you reveal the top 2. The opponent separates those 2 cards into 2 piles, so they're going to put 1 in each, of course, and then you pick one of them, so you're going to pick the one you want. So basically it's look at the top 2, pick a card, kind of. Same idea. So we have a 5 mana, 5/5 flyer, ward, gets us cards. Very similar, a little bit different, but similar enough and very affordable. So this is a very nice find, I think. And that brings us to another big problem with this deck, and that's Blood on the Snow. I'm going to be honest, this is kind of irreplaceable. The best option is probably Meathook Massacre, and that is crazy expensive. We have perfectly valid options in other colors as well, like Depopulate and Path of Peril, but I don't think it's worth splashing white if we're on a budget. It's going to be very expensive in terms of mana, and if you play basics, then, well, your mana is going to suck. So I actually think the best option is actually Consuming Tide, sadly. It's 4 mana, it bounces the entire board. Each person gets to pick 1 permanent, which is good for us because we're likely either not going to have a permanent or we're only going to have 1 or 2 anyway. So it doesn't affect us too badly, but it bounces the opponent's entire board. Very good against like aggro decks and stuff. Good against all the tokens that, planeswalkers are producing, stuff like that. So it's not that it's bad, it's fine. It's just not as good as Blood on the Snow. Blood on the Snow, wiping the entire board and then getting a threat back from the graveyard was just insane. So this definitely feels like a downgrade, but it will work. It'll work for now. Or you can just play, like another card draw spell or something here if you wanted. Another card to keep your eye on though here is probably Karn Silex. I think this could also go in this slot. Basically, you pay X and you destroy all non-land permanents that cost X or less. So you pay 6, everything that costs 6 or less gets wiped out. I think this is very good. I think it would work for us on a budget as a replacement. They are like $8 to $10 each. So we need 3 of them. So we're looking at $25 to $30 or so. So I think that's a little bit too expensive for what I'm trying to do in this video. But if you have any of these can definitely go in this slot as well. And that brings us to the spells, and the spells are so much easier to replace. Holy crap. So first off, Baleful Masteries go right into Rona's Vortex. So both of these offer a cheap way to deal with a creature early, and then a more expensive way to deal with it more resolutely in the late game. The Vortex is a 1 mana bounce spell, 1 mana bounce something, and then if we have 4 mana, it can bury a creature at the bottom of the opponent's library, dealing with it permanently. So very similar, right? If we don't have mana, just 1 mana, bounce it, stall for time. If it's the late game, just deal with the threat permanently. Very good. Next we have Powerword Kill, and this can be taken out for Cut Down. Both of these are a little spotty, right? Cut Down is a huge boon against aggro decks. Can be a little bit iffy in the late game, but that was sort of true for Powerword Kill, not being able to kill all the big threats, no dragons, no angels, stuff like that. So similar, Cut Down being played in most Dimir Control decks. I've like 95% of them, so it's nice to have. And if you're playing against a control deck with only big threats, then you cut it for counter spells in game 2. Next, we have Saw coming. This can be probably converted to Syncopates. I can't believe Syncopates just aren't being played that much right now. It's like almost like people forgot that it's in Standard. Hey guys, Syncopates in Standard. People forgot about it. I don't know, no one's playing it. And if you don't want to play Syncopate because no one else is, then you probably just put like a collection of negates and essence scatters. Like a lot of decks are playing like 1 negate, 1 essence scatter, and 1 disdainful stroke, just like a big variety of different types of counter spells. And I guess that's fine, but I kind of like Syncopate, so I'm going to put Syncopate in my deck, and if you want to play negates and essence scatters and stuff, that's also fine. So next, we have Jawari Disruption. So obviously we don't have a clean replacement for this. This was a counter spell on one side and a land on the other. We don't have flip lands right now. Hopefully we'll get more soon because I really like these. But in the meantime, there's a really good 2-drop in the form of Impulse that I think is just fine here. So for 2 mana, you get to look at the top 4 cards and put one in your hand. That's a lot of digging. 4 cards deep to find something in a control deck is amazing. So it's similar to Jawari Disruption in that if we need a land, if we're missing a land drop, digging 4 cards deep, we're probably going to find a land. And if we don't, then we get through 4 cards to hopefully find one in our 5th or 6th card. And if we need like a counter spell or a removal spell, again, 4 cards deep is pretty good for just finding stuff. So I think this works as a pretty okay replacement for Jawari Disruption. I also recommend taking out Parasitic Grasp for 2 more Rona's Vortex. So the grasps aren't rotating, they're just very situational. They're very good against some decks, they're basically useless against others. So I would rather take the grasps out, put Rona's Vortex in the main board, and then just move these over to the sideboard. That's my preference. And yeah, that's the main board. Going on to the basics, pretty simple. We need to take out all the snow basics for just regular ones, so definitely do that. That should be basically free. I assume you have lands, basic lands. You can get them for free at local game stores usually, or for very cheap. So yeah, replace those. You can also replace ice tunnels with Waterfront Districts. While these aren't technically great lands, they're better than the ice tunnels, because the ice tunnels, well, first off, they're rotating, they're illegal, but they don't do anything, right? They're just snow lands. That's why this was being played. It's a snow land for Blood on the Snow, but now that we don't have that, it's another tap land, whatever, and it can be cracked for a card in the late game, so that's fine. Although, another thing I would consider, I can't put it in on our budget, but Triomes. These are way too expensive for us, but if you happen to open any of the blue-black ones, even though we don't need the 3rd color, the fact that these can be cycled when we're flooded and also give us extra land types for our domain stuff, right? Because we have Drag to the Bottom and Sphinx of Clear Skies now. Just having this tap land that can be cycled, like if we compare Ice Tunnel with one of these Triomes, right? They both enter tapped, they both add blue and black. The 3rd color doesn't matter, but the Triome can be cycled and it gives us an extra land type for Sphinx of Clear Skies. So I think these are fine as well, but obviously they're very expensive, so not what I am suggesting for our budget build. So we don't really have a good replacement for Hall of the Storm Giants. Ideally, these would probably just go into channel lands, but both of these are kind of expensive, so we're probably just playing basics for now. We also need to take 5 cards out of the sideboard, and these spots can be filled with like situational counterspells and removal. For example, we took 2 Parasitic Grasp out of the main board, so we can just shove those right into the side. So that's free. Put those in the side. That leaves us with 3 more slots. You can just fill this with things like Negate, Essence Scatter, stuff like this. These cards are very, very powerful counter spells, except for the part where they're situational, right? They have conditions. So if we're playing Negate against an all-in creature deck, it doesn't do anything. But if we're playing against a control deck, it's like the best counter spell ever. Now again, Essence Scatter are the same. Against a creature-based aggro deck, 2 mana counter any other creatures. Fantastic, but against a creatureless control deck with a bunch of planeswalkers, it's dead. So put these in the sideboard, bring them in when they're relevant. That's the idea. And yeah, that's all we gotta do. Here's the final list, and is this the most optimal Dimir Control deck ever? Absolutely not, because we're not playing Sheoldred and Liliana and Meat Hook Massacre. And there's also other stuff like Planeswalkers, right? Like Kato, Sorin, Silver Scrutiny, also probably worth considering. So there is plenty of room for improvement, but this gets the deck back up and running for super cheap. It's very affordable. This is now standard legal, didn't require a ton of investment, and you're good to go. And then you can start upgrading with those really expensive cards if you want to. It's optional, right? So hopefully that's helpful. This was one of the more difficult decks to upgrade just because so many of the cards that we would normally play are very expensive because black control decks are so popular right now that all the cards are very high priced. But you know, we got there. We got the deck up and running again. We're in standard. We can play out Friday Night Magic, and I think the deck is still pretty solid. So there you go. Hopefully that's useful. Thanks for watching regardless, and I will see you in the next one.